Very good. Good morning, everybody. I'm Timothy Brock. I happened to be at the Piazza last night to conduct my restored and adapted version of VAMPYR, which was a film that I saw, I don't know, for the first time in the mid-'80s, I suppose. But the first time I saw it, I thought, what a great silent film that was. But in fact, of course, as I reflected upon it, I realized that it's not at all silent. It's a sound film, but its approach and its technique, of course, are well versed in the silent era. And the thing I remember the most about it was probably the first time I've seen a score where the music reflected almost exactly to great detail the sort of nebbia, as they would say in Italian, or the fog of a film. It was the first time I'd heard music that actually sounded like a dream or sounded like a fog, not in so much of an impressionistic way, but more of a kind of real, tangible way, because in the fragility of the strings and the type of approach that Zeller made musically for film, I thought was extremely unique. And I always thought, well, this would be great to do as a silent film. But then, of course, we realized, and at this point, you know, the technology of removing dialogue and sound effects from a film was much more difficult than it is now. And it's still hard. You'll notice that when the sound of the film came on, you could hear the antiquity of it. You could hear the hiss and the scratchiness in terms of the dialogues. And some were better than others. In fact, in the beginning of the film, when Alan reaches the hotel, the first bit of sound that you hear is him knocking on the window, and that sounded horrible. It didn't even sound like a knock. It sounded like somebody cracking walnuts. And when the girl on top of the roof says, "Walk around," the sound was terrible. It sounds like the first bit of dialogue they had, they were still, in fact, inventing sound in a way. But I was absolutely in love with the score, and I wanted to do a silent version of it, so to speak, which was, in the mid-'80s, the late '80s. It's not really considered ethical. You know, I mean, you would not do that now. You would not try to make a sound film into a silent film. But then I was thinking that would be a good idea. But I learned a lot since then, and realized, of course, with that, technology has improved, and so you are able to do a sound film like it was a silent film. And well, I'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, I tried to track down the score for a very long time. I talked to that man there, who's coming in several times. I talked to various other people about doing the score, like, where is it? And we say, well, it could be here, it could be here. And I talked to Martin Kerber about it as well, of course. And finally, we were able to sort of track it down, and we did not know the completeness of it. The completeness, that's not the right word. Whatever. I didn't know how complete the score was. Then I was happy to find, when we were able to get it, that it was about 85 to 90% complete in terms of it was all there on paper, but there was a lot of changes, just like in almost all early film score recordings. They, of course, make lots of changes by the composer or in the case of Chaplin, of course, what Charlie made, like when I restored Modern Times in 1999, the score was about 1.5 meters thick because he did so many changes during the session. And Zeller did that too, and he improvised a lot during the session as well. But anyway, we were able to look at at this, I was able to find the score, and it looks like this. If I can open that up, please. There we go. This is the first page. And for those of you who don't know how to read music, I mean, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like, but it's quite clear as to what he wanted. It starts off very quietly at piano. This is in the first measure. This is one measure on the left. It starts off very, very quietly, and then the main title appears on the second note of the second bar. So it's a dee, dum, bum, and then it says Vampyr. And then the violins play on, and it goes like that. And this is the clearest of all the pages. There's hardly any changes. There's hardly any notations by Zeller himself other than notes. And so I was thrilled to see that. I'll play you the opening credit so you can, I assume that I can't have these both running at the same time, but let me just look. Probably not. So, try to memorize that score. And then, I'm clicking on that. Sorry, I'm trying to get the Vampyr. There it is. Yeah, this is the Criterion release. Can I get the, there we go. Very difficult to see. Yeah, just the opening credits. It's before that. There, okay, right from there. Okay. This has sound on it? Yes. So, there's that first long note in black, down second note of the second score. That's the first page. The first page is done. It's now on the second page. Third page. So, anyway, it goes on from there. Let me go back to the manuscript then, if I may. Oh, here. So that's, oh, yeah, sorry, wrong one. So that's the first page. Second page is that. Again, pretty clean. Everything is pretty clear. And then, of course, you can see up under letter B, he makes changes in the instrumentation. He does that on the fly, so that when he hears something he doesn't like, he'll immediately switch it around. Usually, they'll just tell the players what to do, because you don't really have time to take out your pen and ink and rewrite everything. But I don't know if this, because underneath this manuscript is everything's in pencil. And so, and then he wrote over in pen. So I don't know if that included the changes that he made after he composed, heard it, and then made the changes later, and then deposited the score in the archives. I don't know exactly. Or if he made those changes as he did it. But there's lots of things that were difficult to figure out, because when Zeller wrote the score, he and rightly so, assumed that he would be the only person seeing that music. So he wasn't real careful about some of his indications as to what things mean. Like, for instance, I can't, oh, that's tempo marks. I'm going to look for, excuse me, there's a section like here, for example. I'm going to blow it up here. You see that's all that writing underneath. You know, we're not quite sure what this, obviously this is David, it says David. He wrote David throughout the whole score. And for those of you who know anything about the film, the reason, the protagonist's name is Alan, right? But for some reason, the version that he was working with, either it's because of the British version of the three films, perhaps somebody can correct me as to why that is. But he wrote David instead of Alan because in the British version, he was called David. So we write, every time we see David come up on the screen, he writes David here. And there's a lot of other things that were completely indecipherable for me. Like this, can you see my cursor? Okay. That, for example, I don't even remember what it is now. But, and over here, a lot of it I had to figure out. So I actually engaged Martin Kerber to actually, because I knew he knew the film very well, and he, of course, is German. So I asked him to help me try to solve some of these mysteries, to try to figure out where things go in synchronization. When you watch the film, you assume that, of course, Zeller put all the music exactly in sync with where he intended it to be. But that, in fact, is not the case. You can see that he missed the mark several times, which is extremely hard to do. We're not talking about in the time period when you had streamers and time code necessarily to work with. You have earlier versions of those things, but it wasn't nearly as accurate. So all these little things written here are clues as to where I think that they should probably go. And I think that we got pretty close with most of them, because once you're able to kind of figure out where things go, and you figure out the tempo in which things are supposed to be, and if you use that same formula in another section where the tempo's not supposed to be not changed any, you can see where things are supposed to lie, because he obviously wrote it with a metronome, and it was quite clear as to where things should go. So it was a big job to put this score kind of into playable form. And then, of course, the most difficult aspect of it was trying to figure out how to use the sound effectively and try to make it sound as seamless as possible, technologically, of course, but also musically, because the sound effects in the film were almost done completely by the orchestra and by the percussion section especially. There is a special instrument that was invented by Edmund Meisel called the noise box, essentially. The Gesauste-Kiste, something like that. Excuse me, my German is horrendous. And it's a big wooden box that you put various objects inside the box that make a lot of noise, and then you crank it. It just sounds like a bunch of gears, and it's just called a noise box. And he wrote just noise box on the score, and the percussionist had to sit there and crank this thing. And that was obviously used for the mill in the end of the film, with all the gears moving. I thought about actually trying to get a noise box and to try to do that whole thing live, like I did with other things like the bells and so forth. But I decided that one of the great qualities, the things that I love about VAMPYR, was the actual sound effects that they did then for certain aspects. Like the sound of the mill gears for me was too precious to cover over with a modern version of that. So I decided to do them both. We used the noise box from 1931 recording, in this case, 1931 recording, and I got a version of that noise box to do it live. So we just combined the two, which I thought was fairly effective, and it was just a choice that I made that I thought was the best thing to do. There was a couple of sound effects in there that were, you could tell what they were supposed to be, but ended up not sounding like it. So we ended up replacing, I think, just one door handle that you couldn't hear. It just sounded like noise. And so we replaced that one, and we replaced one knocking on the window. No, we didn't replace. We replaced the first one with the second one. That's what we did. We didn't make a modern version of that. We took, when he knocks on the door the first time, you can't hear it. It just sounds like that. But the second time, when he goes around, before the girl lets him into the hotel, he gives a nice clean sound. So we took that one and put it on the front. Other than that, everything is exactly how the film was originally. So in this case, you heard how the opening was, and I will show you what our version sounds like. And just removing essentially all we did was remove the music from the film and tried to leave everything else. This is going to be absolutely silent. I want to actually skip ahead. We've already seen sorry, I'm used to how to fast forward. Sorry, where did you do that? There, thank you. So here, this is the copy I used last night. And the clarinet solo here, this is when Alan comes. The music is playing here. And there hasn't been any sound from the film at all. And then the knock we replaced is coming up here. That was silent originally. So that's the second knock, and we replaced it. Then he walks around, and you'll notice it's the same quality of knock. So they're identical. That. You notice the two different qualities of sound there. Gilles Barberis at the works here in the lab in Bologna helped. We did all this sound extraction together, and he's very good. We've been working together for a good 10, 12 years now, now, for example, this, I decided to use the original bell because there's a quality to that you can't replace live. And it was obviously that bell that you see, so why replace it? Of course, it's easy to, there, now I'll stop it. It's easy to replace a bell, obviously, musically, but it is impossible to replace a bell that sounds like that with a bell live that sounds like that. It's just with the image of the man with the scythe and him just ringing that bell from behind. I didn't want to try to mimic that. Also, frankly, it's almost impossible to synchronize that while conducting. It's not impossible, but it takes a lot of practice. But I just thought that was a choice that I wanted to make. I just wanted to try to leave as much of the original as possible, it not being a silent film. It's the same thing, again, working for the Chaplins now since '98. Some of the choices that we had to make for Modern Times, for example, which is a sound film. But we tried to keep as many of the original sound effects as possible. The only one that we actually had to replace completely in that case was the feeding machine sequence, which we did with old 1940s vacuum cleaners and various other noises that we did in Los Angeles in '98. Same thing here, but it was just the technology now compared to back then is considerably better. So now it's just a matter of, once we've removed the music from the film and replaced the original sound effects, it's a matter of trying to make the orchestra and the sound effects work as one. The tone of the sound effects that happened, of course, because as I said, the percussionist did most of the sound effects in the original recording. There's a specific type of tone that the sound effects have that you have to match. The type, and when you're working with an old recording, the sound level, of course, is not going to be a steady, what do they call that? The universal arc? I don't remember. I'm not a film person, but it's whatever. The what? That's it. Thank you. The Academy curve. There's not a universal sound level that's going to always be at zero. It's going to be up and down. So you have to make the orchestra work so that when, for instance, Leone was in her bed and she feels that she was damned for life and she felt like she was losing her soul, you could hear her crying at a very quiet level, and the music had to reflect that. So when she was starting to break down, essentially she started to stiff, and then she tried to collect herself, and then she couldn't anymore, and she wept, right? So you've got several layers of sound there to deal with music that has to weave in and out so that it doesn't seem completely unnatural. It's a lot like, if for those of you who know opera, it's a lot like working with a recitative, because you have to have these sustained chords while something happens on screen. And in this case, with Leone, I say Leone because I haven't been living in Italy too long, but it's Lyon. When she starts to break down, then the music is quite subtle, but then when she starts to really let the tears flow, then the orchestra come up and rises up and supports that sound effect. It's very much like what Zeller did himself, and I'm going to show you that scene here. Excuse me. That's my version, right? Yes. Yeah, I want to go to the other version, sorry. Thank you. Yes, thank you. I'm going to go to that scene. Okay, thank you. Let me get to that. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to let that play. As you know the film. Sorry, guys. There it is. So, is it full? No, there we go. Double click. But you hear the music also reflects the words and the text under these book sequences, not to be too distracting because the composer knows people are going to be reading, but it's always moving. So the music reacts to the sound. Saxophone enters here, which is a very unusual instrumental choice, but she's under the spell of the vampire. So we need an unusual instrument to represent her. Listen what happens to music to what she does. The music comes down. And then moves on.
Ach, könnte ich doch sterben.
Nein, Leon.
Ich weiß. Ich bin verloren. Ich bin verdammt.
The music sounds defeated. And then changes with a simple instrument, with the cymbal, which you probably can't hear in this recording, reflecting the change in her face. There's a tam-tam here. She's a completely different person now, and so is the music. Went from very weak to very strong. So you can hear the way the music works there, and also works with sound. Again, having to support just even the smallest sound. The fact that she's just sort of whimpering at the beginning and then a full-fledged cry afterwards. And music, obviously, the composer is well-versed in silent film composition, because in silent film, that's exactly how you do that musically. You reflect the person that's talking or speaking, in this case in intertitles, but in this case live, I mean with sound, but in silent film with intertitles, the person is weak, the music sounds weak. And then he brings in an instrument that is unusual, that reminds you that there's something wrong with that person, in this case in the saxophone. And then he just, when she tilts her head, then the tam-tam comes in, which is an unusual, tam-tam is like a big giant gong. You couldn't see it from where, if you were sitting in the audience, but it's a gong that's about, if it was on this ground, it's about this big. So it's very, very, very big. And you play it by standing in front of it and hitting it like this, so that your body can dampen it if need be. Anyway, when she tilts her head, then that tam-tam comes in, which is the signal of a transformation. And what a great actress. I just love this scene so much. She's able to just turn like that. And Zella is clever enough to know how to do that musically by doing these high note trills in the violins. And just becoming a different person, both musically and visually. Speaking of the high notes in terms of the violins, there was some passages in there which I did not realize that had to have been somewhat influential to Bernard Herrmann, because there are quite a number of passages in there that so clearly have heritage in this piece, because it's an amazing piece of music, and there are some chord structures and patterns there that I've never seen in any other score besides Herrmann. So I was quite surprised to see that, and quite happy about that. So anyway, working with a sound film is a completely different animal than it is doing silent film, as you might expect. In silent film, a composer has complete, I mean, assuming that the director has been passed away for many years, a modern composer has a complete opportunity to do whatever they want, essentially. And you have to be quite sensitive to the director. Not everybody's that way, but some people but most people, I think most people who take the time to write an orchestra score for a silent film take that into account. But writing for silent film is you have your world is your oyster. You're able to do whatever you really want to do. In sound film, you don't have that kind of luxury at all, because you know that you have to deal with dialogue, sound effects, and things like that. This is a very specific. I mean, modern film composers, obviously, like Daniele, who writes, lots of great music for contemporary film. He has to deal with sound all the time, and dialogue and sound effects. He's got to deal with all these other factors, whereas someone like me never does. So I wouldn't even know how to do that, in fact. So, bravo, complimenti. But it's a completely different animal. So working with this is like doing both, because obviously I'm not the composer here, but I have to treat the music as he did, and you have to sort of imitate somebody else's performance too, which is another factor with doing score restorations of silent film. You are locked in a time capsule that you're not really able to get out of. Certainly the case with any of the other restorations that I've done that have been recorded, not the ones that have not been recorded, such as my restoration of Shostakovich's New Babylon, for example. That was a score that was never recorded originally. Whereas Chaplin, he recorded every note he ever wrote, and plus the notes you've never even heard he's recorded as well. So you are locked into a performance that you can only assume is accurate, because it's the composer himself conducting in this case. So all the dynamics, all the expression, the portamenti, every note that Zeller wrote in his manuscript, or what you are able to hear, has to be imitated and has to be written down. And that includes also, of course, performance practices from the 1920s, because the way they played music 100 years ago is nothing like they play it now. You have to come to an orchestra and talk to them for quite a while before you even start rehearsing about how to play in a specific style, because even the classical repertoire, they play Brahms now. The way they played Brahms 150 years ago is not how they play it now. So it is a very specific, unique to that time period. So when I go to an orchestra, I have to talk to the strings about the type of vibrato that they use, for example, sort of an intense, burnished vibrato. I want to be able to hear the shift when they have to go from anywhere from first position to third, fourth position. I want to hear that slide into the note. I have to write in all the glissandi. The trombone had to use a very specific type of mute, because the trombone, interestingly enough, in this score, trombones usually are just trombones, right? But this trombone, Zeller required the trombonist to play with a mute the entire time. A mute is a long, in this case, it was a fiber mute, and I have a bunch of mutes from the 1920s that I bring with me when I go conduct orchestras. He had to put in this mute, so he had this big block out of his bell all night long. He had to play with a mute. I don't know why he did that, honestly. I still haven't really quite figured it out, other than the fact that it could be that he wanted it to sound more like a reed instrument, because maybe he only had one bassoon player. I kind of doubt it. I think there's more than one bassoon player in Germany. But that's the case. He played with a mute the whole time. The instrumentation is very strange in this score, because there's no flutes, there's no oboes, and he used only a French horn, or a corno. He used only for the funeral sequence at the end, when he had to have the Trauermarsch, the death march, which is very, very slow and very somber. He needed the brass for that. So he only used a French horn for about 12 measures. He used a celeste for about the same amount, dozen measures or so. The bandoneon, the accordion, was only used in that sequence with where that little dance music's happening and you see all the dancers on the shadows. That was only used there and never anywhere else. And I think that, and there was also a second trombone who had 4 measures to play. Now, in practicality purposes, of course, you can't do that. You can't ask a trombone player to come and play 4 measures and then pay him full amount, you know? So that's just not gonna happen. So, and to ask an accordion player to come and play this scene that lasts about 35 seconds, also not practical for orchestras to do. So I ended up having to revoice some of those instruments, but put indications in the score that if you have, by any chance, any member of your orchestra that plays the accordion, have them play that. And if you have a second trombone, play this. This is how it was originally. So I wrote down the organico, or the original instrumentation, on the front of the score saying, I replaced these instruments because most people don't have an accordion player, or so forth. So that orchestras can do it exactly how Zeller had the original score, which means having a second trombone player count measures for about 64 minutes. I would never want to do that. That's a nightmare. Just 2, 3, 4, for 64 minutes, you know, and then come in hopefully at the right place. Not practical. So, but if somebody wanted to do it that way, that's great. And that's the way the score is. So they have that chance. I kind of got off on the side there, but essentially, like I said, working with a sound film of this type is much like doing sound and silent films kind of together. It was great fun to do. And then about 6 weeks before the performance or so, I said to Gianluca, I said, you know, it'd be great if we could have one of the bells ring. I thought San Petronio, have the bell ring at the church. And that wasn't possible because apparently they replaced their bell system and it sounds quite modern now. It sounds quite different. So we had the idea of asking the podesta over there, and that worked out beautifully, I thought. So it took quite a bit of bureaucratic phone calling from Gianluca and Cecilia and various others to make sure that we could get a bell ringer up there. So we were able to do that, and Paolo was up there looking at the film and raising his hand and saying, go to the bell ringer, and he started ringing. And then there was applause after he was done, which I did not expect at all. And that was really nice. That was really beautiful. So it was great to do that last night. I thought the orchestra did very, very well, and a good response. So I think I should open it up to some questions now and see if there are any questions. Thomas? Oh, doing the microphone, yes. Okay. I saw a hand over here. Okay. He was here. I think that's fine. Go ahead. Whoever wants, please. Why don't you go ahead and ask me the question, and I'll see if I can answer while there.
Question is do you think that the original composer considered technical problem that at that time the dynamics of recording was very close, very slow, and for that reason it could be the normal symphonic orchestra dynamics, and he put this on his scores. And the sub-question is, if we do that, do you consider it when you restore the original score and when it was played yesterday?
Yes, I mean, the thing is you have to consider two different elements. One is that his orchestra was very small. If you listen to the recording, there's only probably 4 first violins, 3 or 4 first violins, and 2 second violins, 1 cello, 1 bass, 1 viola. Because, of course, I mean, I don't think the budget was terribly big for this, but I don't think that was the reason. I think he wanted an intimate sound. In terms of dynamics, and the way he phrased it, I can tell that he was thinking that it was going to be bigger, but in fact it ended up not being bigger. And in terms of the doing it live, of course you need to increase the amount of strings that you have. And of course the old adage is about string players is that it's much easier to sound softer. It's much easier to be softer the more strings you've got, which is the opposite of what you would think. The more strings, the louder it is. But in fact, it's the opposite. The effect is the larger amount of violins you've got, the softer it sounds, because it's so much smoother. There's not one voice you're hearing. It's all just kind of very faint. So I think he definitely did consider the amount of strings he had, and I don't know if he really considered the limitation of recording. I don't think you can know about the limitation of recording other than the fact that it just doesn't sound like it does live.
Hi.
Hey.
Is it working?
Yes,
it is working. Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
And thank you very much for a great show last night.
Thank you.
I was wondering, are there pieces, I mean, in the reviews of the Berlin premiere in 1932, they claim that between the first and the second performance, stuff was cut out of the film.
Yeah, I heard that.
And that's always sounded a bit odd to me, but I mean, are there any indications in the score that it might have been shortened in places? No,
in fact, I mean, there are bits of music, not a lot, but there are bits of music that was not that I don't have a recording of. There was some passages in there, but there's also bits that were taken out of the film, like that part when they stop the doctor from poisoning Leon, and he goes running out, and that big crash sound, and then it goes silent suddenly for about, I don't know, 30 seconds, a long time, until he goes outside. And that great shot of them circling the room before he goes outside. There's no music for that, for example. It was just cut, but the film is still there, but there's no music underneath it, and that's got to be a mistake. It's got to be something got lost there in the optical track or whatever. But I have not seen any indication of any cuts whatsoever, frankly. I've heard that story too, that in between the first and second show, that in the projection booth they just started cutting, and I don't see that.
I don't see it either, but I mean, it is in one of the Berlin paper, in the review, in one of the Berlin papers.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, it could be, but this version, no, I don't think so. I think it's complete. Serge?
Yeah, have you heard of the Grand Guignol Theater in Paris, which was a theater with basically gore effects, and you would have people killed, heads chopped off, and people would go there. And today, when something is like too big, too ugly, you say it's Grand Guignolesque, which is Grand Guignol. You know, the Guignol is the small marionettes. So the Grand Guignol was a very cheap theater, and it was in the teens and 20s. And basically, you had these actors, you had a very small orchestra, but you had something that was inherited from the early teens, which was a sound effect box.
Yeah.
And the sound effect box, you had the wind.
Which we had last night. We had a wind machine last night.
Yeah, okay. So,
did you see it? It's a big white thing. It's a big barrel with a rough canvas on the outside,
Yep.
and the man was cranking it.
So the thing is, we have a 1912 machine that, let's say, in only one piece of furniture, has all the sounds that you would expect. the plates thrown at each other, cling, cling, you know, the locomotive, the train, the whistle. And it's interesting that we find out that in the late 20s, at the beginning of sound, all the cartoon films and all the cheap films, they don't have sound of real wind or real door or real carriages. They have the sound of these machines.
Yeah.
They thought, you know, why bother to have an actual sound effect when people are happy with this just cheap reconstructed. I was thinking of the sound effect box.
Yeah, well, I mean, the noise box was, as I said, it was an Edmund Meisel invention, and it was used quite a lot, I think. But sound effects happened so frequently. I mean, last year we did the General and I wanted to bring a railroad imitation, which is a box with 8 springs inside, and a stick inside that you rub up against these metal springs to make it sound the sound of a locomotive. It was made by the Ludwig and Sons company in 1915, but they don't exist in Italy, and it was during COVID, so I wasn't able to obviously go back to the States, and I live here in Bologna, so I built one and used it for that. And now every time I do the General, I have to bring this bloody box with me everywhere. It's really heavy and noisy. Plus getting it through security, forget about it. I mean, what the hell is this? It's a locomotive, it's a railroad imitation. What are you talking about? What is it? It's obvious what it is. Yeah, that's very common. I've actually really enjoyed that. But we did actually have a wind machine last night, which is a monster of an instrument. That's why I wanted the percussion to stand up last night before everybody else, because they did a terrific job last night. Another question?
Maybe more of a comment. Thank you very much. It was a fantastic show, and I think, 5D cinema?
What?
With the bell.
Yeah.
I think now, I mean, next time, I don't know what you're going to come up with to do that.
Talk about getting through security with that.
Know.
That's.
But no, I think it was great, and I think I really appreciate also the talk that you did here about restoring this, because VAMPYR is, of course, a sound film. And every year, I mean, we have the rights, and we're also, the caretakers of Dreyer's immaterial and moral rights. And I think that you went to a great extent to live up to his vision and artistic.
That's very kind
background
from you.
of this. Because we, ongoing, we get requests. Can we show this? We've created a new score for this, and they're like, oh man. Okay, close your eyes and hope for that it's not too much of a monster. And I think this has really been a pleasure to cooperate with. And,
Thank you.
And I really enjoyed the show last night.
Thank you very much.
And
That's
your
very
work on
kind
it.
coming from you. Thank you. Anything else? No? Good. Well, thank you very much.